Well, the Philadelphia Eagles officially named Kevin Patullo as the new offensive coordinator for 2025. I think there is a lot of pressure on this hiring being right. I'll tell you why coming up on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm your host, Louie DiBiase. Breaking news that happened just about an hour ago. The Philadelphia Eagles have their new offensive coordinator. It is Kevin Patullo, who will replace Kellen Moore in 2025. An internal promotion that was clearly a Nick Sirianni-led decision. Patullo was the Eagles' pass game specialist, pass game coordinator in 2024. Deserves a lot of credit for helping mesh the two philosophies of Nick Sirianni and Kellen Moore to create the offense that won the Eagles Super Bowl 59. I like it from a perspective of it brings continuity to a situation that's had little of it. Jalen Hurts, this is going to be his sixth play caller since he's been the Eagles' starting quarterback, or at least since he's been drafted in 2020. So from that perspective, I do like it. But for me, I would have preferred an outside hire, maybe somebody with play calling experience. I do think just bringing in a fresh set of eyes every single year when you do lose your coordinator is a good idea, because then you bring in fresh ideas and it's not stale. And I think internal promotions in the past, they just haven't worked with the Eagles. Like Doug Peterson promoting Mike Groh after Frank Reich left for the Colts. It did not work. Nick Sirianni promoting Brian Johnson after Shane Steichen left in 2023. It did not work. So Kevin Patullo, again, did a really good job of combining both offenses last year. He's Nick Sirianni's right-hand man. The team loves him, like the players have his back, the coaches as well. This was a move that I think most people did sign off on. And he is somebody that's been rising through the ranks in Philadelphia. But for me, I don't love the move based on the history of internal promotions, the fact that he has never called plays before, and just I like the options that were out there. I really liked the idea of a Gerard Johnson or a Josh McCown or somebody from an LA Rams Sean McVay coaching tree just to bring in new ideas, somebody with some play calling experience. That's what I would have preferred, and I think it's what Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Louie normally prefer as well. It's why they kind of forced Sirianni's hand, I think, last year in hiring Kellen Moore. But it does look like this time around, those two kind of let Nick Sirianni pick. He won the Super Bowl. He deserves the right and the benefit of the doubt to choose his coaching staff. And it is interesting, though. It's a delicate situation that we have faced before in Philadelphia, and it's led to some turmoil, to some power struggles, to some end of eras. Like, this is very similar to what happened with Doug Peterson, because when a head coach comes into Philadelphia, they have to kind of be okay with a unique power dynamic where the GM and owner, they have their hands on everything, more than other teams' owners and general managers. Like, they have say at times in things that normally should be up to the coach, like who's going to be the offensive coordinator? Who's going to be the defensive coordinator? Yes, Nick Sirianni, I'm sure, had a lot of say in bringing in last year Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio. Like, he deserves credit for those hires, but we know Vic Fangio was Howie's guy. Like, we know Jeffrey Louie and Howie Roseman wanted Nick Sirianni to bring in an outside voice to help with a stale offense in 2023 that Jalen Hurts was not okay with. So that's normally been the power dynamic in Philadelphia, but when a head coach gets more success, wins championships like Doug Peterson did, like Nick Sirianni did, eventually they get more power and want more power. And that's clearly what happened with Doug. They allowed him to pick his coordinators after Super Bowl 52. He went with Mike Groh and then, of course, had Press Taylor being a big voice in that locker room for 3 years. They let Nick Sirianni pick this time as well with Kevin Patullo. But remember what happened. Howie Roseman, Jeffrey Louie, like, they loosened the leash on Doug. They said, you won the championship, you deserve to pick this next guy. It didn't work. And so what did Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Louie do? They tightened the leash again. They said in 2020, here's some more cooks in the kitchen. Here's Marty Morningweg. Here's I can't remember the coach's name from the Shanahan coaching tree over in San Francisco. Here's a bunch of guys. Mix all of this together because we're not okay with your stale offense. Doug went along with it for one more year, and then he wasn't okay with it anymore. He said, I'm not putting up with this power dynamic. I've earned more, and we're done. And Doug Peterson was fired. Not saying that same thing's going to happen this time around with Nick Sirianni, but it's very important that they do get this right, that Kevin Patullo is a good play caller, is a good offensive coordinator, that this offense does not regress like it did after the previous Super Bowl, like they did after Super Bowl 52. Because, and I'm not saying it could lead to the offense being terrible next year and it could lead to the downfall of Jalen Hurts. Like, there's just too much talent on this offense for them to regress to that level. But if it doesn't work to the satisfaction of the top of this organization, and Nick Sirianni now wants more power, that's where this is delicate. This needs to work, because if they ever want to get their hands on this again like they did last year and like they have in the past with other coaches, this is when it could get messy. So this is a very important decision that Nick Sirianni made. And I'm not saying that Howie and Jeffrey were just completely against bringing in Patullo as the OC or promoting him from within. But I do think this is Nick Sirianni's guy. Patullo has been with him since the start, since 2021. I think the internal promotion screams head coach, just like it did with Doug Peterson. So this is a very, very important move that can help keep the peace of the current power dynamic the Eagles have. Because if it doesn't go well, we saw how messy it got with Doug Peterson. We saw in 2023 how messy it got, where who knows if it was Sirianni's choice or Howie's choice to fire Desai during the year, bring in Matt Patricia, who was Howie Roseman's guy. It's gotten messy before. And we know this owner and GM have a history of power struggles with head coaches. Even before Doug Peterson, this happened with Chip Kelly. So Nick Sirianni now has the resume, has the legacy with the ring. I'm very curious. He got the power here. Very curious to see how this one goes. And in the future, if it doesn't work out, how the big three, the head coach, the GM, and the owner, how they will go about that situation. It's very interesting. The past has told us this internal promotion doesn't always go well, and it could lead to more. But at the same time, I'm not trying to say I think a collapse is coming next year again, that Kevin Patullo can't do it just because he hasn't called plays. This offense is so talented, and he did do a really good job last year of combining the best of Nick Sirianni's offense and the best of Kellen Moore's to help kind of marry those two. And so I think Patullo does deserve some credit in that, just like Sirianni and Kellen Moore do. But again, for me personally, I would have preferred the outside hire, a young up-and-coming coach like a Josh McCown or a Gerard Johnson, someone that played the position, maybe somebody that's called plays in the past, although there weren't a lot of great options out there in that way. I was not a fan of the Frank Reich idea. So compared to that, or Mike McCoy, I'm not in on that. I would prefer Kevin Patullo. But, in a broader spectrum, in a vacuum, I like the idea of bringing in fresh ideas every single year when you do lose your offensive coordinator. But I understand it from a continuity perspective. Jalen Hurts has gone through a lot of change on offense, not just in Philadelphia for 6 years, but he has had a different coordinator, a different play caller, literally every year of his career, going back to Alabama and Oklahoma. So from that perspective, again, I do wish it was an outside hire, but I understand why they said maybe continuity trumps everything. And Patullo does deserve a chance here because he did a really good job helping these two different offenses last year mesh into what was a Super Bowl winning offense. So we'll see how it goes. Very interesting to monitor this situation, though, in the future, because it hasn't always gone well in Philadelphia. And the assistant coaching position sometimes has affected that power dynamic with the big three. And I'm not saying it's going to get messy, but this is more important than you think. They got to make sure that Nick's got to make sure that this is right. Philadelphia should want that for sure. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, we kick off our offseason talk, free agency specifically, with a listener mailbag. What free agent not named Zack Baun should Howie prioritize? All that and more coming your way on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles. This episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by TurboTax. Taxes were waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now that's Taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, we are in full offseason mode now. The Eagles are defending Super Bowl champions, but they got work to do to catch up for the 2025 season. They already named Kevin Patullo as the new offensive coordinator. He will be calling plays for the first time in his career for Jalen Hurts in 2025. Now it's Howie Roseman's turn. Who's he going to re-sign in free agency? What free agents from other teams is he going to bring in? The draft, trades. He's got a lot of work, a lot of decisions to be made over these next few months. Heck, the NFL scouting combine it's a little over a week away. So the offseason comes quick, especially when you win the Super Bowl. The offseason actually starts before you're done. So we got a lot of stuff to catch up on. And I thought, what better way to dive into all the various offseason topics than by talking to you guys. What's on your mind? What are the first things that you want to hit on this offseason? And a lot of it did have to do with the common theme was decisions on internal free agents. Zack Baun, Mekhi Becton, Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, Isaiah Rodgers, Kenneth Gainwell. What are you doing with these players? And we'll start with our first question of the day that has to do with one of those free agents, Mekhi Becton. And this is from Terrell at TBoxedUp on X. Cam Jurgens will need to get paid soon. Does that mean Mekhi Becton is on the outside looking in? It's a good question because when you look at Landon Dickerson, top 5 paid overall guard. Jordan Mailata, Lane Johnson, both in the top 10 when it comes to the highest paid tackles in football. Cam Jurgens, as Terrell mentioned, he's going to get a contract extension, if not this year. I think it's going to be this year, but soon. They are going to pay Cam Jurgens as well. And so that means you'll have 4 of your 5 starting linemen likely in the top 10 of paid players at their position. Does that mean Mekhi Becton is on the outside looking in? Probably. If there's a big if with this. If he wants to cash in. If he wants to take advantage of his career year and get a big contract, yeah, it's not going to be in Philadelphia. You can't pay 5 offensive linemen top 10 contracts. It's just not, even with the salary cap going up today, $25 million more than the NFL expected, and you can kick things down the road. Even with that being said, you can't pay every single guy a top 10 contract on this team. You got to pick and choose. And with Jeff Stoutland's track record of making offensive linemen work at right guard, they've had so much success with so many different guys. Brandon Brooks, Isaac Seumalo, Mekhi Becton, Tyler Steen has played well in 2 years when he comes onto the field. Because I think it's such a replaceable position and they just can't afford to pay everyone, yeah, likely Mekhi Becton is on the outside looking in if he wants to cash in. But after listening to Adam Schefter talk on The Fanatic today, I'm less convinced he's gone today than I was yesterday, because Schefter was talking about, and he talks to people on the inside, so he knows something. He talked about today how Mekhi Becton might see what happened with the Jets, might see how Jeff Stoutland revived his career, how he has established a home in Philadelphia. You saw how emotional he was when they won the Super Bowl, even how grateful he was when they clinched the division against Dallas. The guy was crying. He really, really emotionally cared about this football team and was grateful for his career being revived. Maybe that means he gives Philadelphia a team-friendly contract because he knows the grass is not always greener and he wants to keep this thing rolling and build off the year he had at right guard instead of going somewhere else, and maybe you fall back to your struggles you had with the New York Jets. So I'm not as convinced. Terrell, I would still say it's more likely than not that Becton is gone. Because I think the Eagles are going to be very disciplined in what kind of contract they'd be willing to give him and might lowball him. But if Becton is willing to take a pretty team-friendly deal, like Adam Schefter said he might be, then I think he could be back, and that would be great. I would love in a vacuum to have Becton back as your starting right guard next year. He was dominant in 2024, but I would still bet that he's probably somewhere else. But it is interesting. It is interesting to see because they have to pay Cam Jurgens, and you just can't afford 5 starting linemen getting top 10, top 5 even on average contracts. So interesting question for sure. Becton is the one of the top 4 free agents that I'm most okay with leaving, honestly, just because they have 4 elite linemen up front that are going to be here long term. And Stoutland is such a good coach that Tyler Steen, I think, will be just fine next year. Or if they bring in another veteran or a rookie to compete with Steen, I'm confident in pretty much anybody they plug and play at that spot. Not that they're going to be better than Becton, but I think they'll get a pretty solid return of production or good percentage of replacement production for a lot less money. So, but hopefully they get a team-friendly deal done. Schefter is saying that today made me a little more optimistic. All right, let's go to another question here from Jared Bowley. Who is the most important free agent to keep, not named Zack Baun? So of those guys I mentioned, well, let's remove Zack Baun because you guys know, as I said yesterday, he's the number one priority. Like, you have to pay Baun. The other guys, Becton, would love him back. Josh Sweat, Milton Williams. I would like these guys back. If they're gone, I think the Eagles are going to be fine. You got to bring Baun back. But if there was one guy that they should bring back that should be a quote-unquote priority that isn't named Zack Baun, I would personally say it is Milton Williams because, again, I think Mekhi Becton is pretty replaceable considering the situation the Eagles have or the setup they have on the offensive line. I would say Josh Sweat, like he had a career year last year, led the Eagles in sacks, had, to me, one of the most dominant Super Bowl performances I've seen from a pass rusher. Maybe should have won Super Bowl MVP. He was, to me, the second most worthy player of that award, not, right behind Jalen Hurts. He is only 27 years old, but it's a really good edge class. I think he's going to get overpaid in the open market. There are some options that are cheaper in free agency that I think could replace him. I love the development of Nolan Smith this year and Jalix Hunt. So Becton and Sweat, I'm not going to sweat it if those guys are gone. I would say it's Milton Williams. He's going to be the most expensive of these 4. He could get $20+ million a year. He was number 2 this year in pass rush win rate. He's one of the best one-on-one pass rushing interior linemen that football has, and he's young. This is only going to be his second contract, drafted in 2021. So I think he'll probably outprice himself out of Philadelphia. But in a vacuum, if there was one guy I'd like to keep that's not named Zack Baun, it would be Milton. He's the perfect guy to have next to Jalen Carter to take advantage of the mismatches that Carter allows because Jalen takes all that pressure away, all the attention with double teams that Milton Williams, he commands such a dominant presence because he's got one-on-ones. And Moro Ijoma last year was really good too and was top 15 in his own right in pass rush win rate for tackles. So, and it's a good draft class at tackle as well. So I think Milton is replaceable as well. I'm not saying any of these guys have to come back, but if there was one I would prefer, it would be Milton. Having a dominant, elite, young, pass rushing defensive tackle, that's a really good player to have, especially next to an alpha generational player like Jalen Carter to take advantage of those mismatches. A lot of guys can take advantage, but Milton takes it to another level. 2 sacks in the Super Bowl, including a strip sack on Patrick Mahomes. This guy is different, but that's why I do think he's going to get paid, and they'll have to turn to Ijoma, Jordan Davis, and then whoever they draft in 2025. But if there was one guy in a vacuum I'd want back to prioritize, quote-unquote, I think it would be Milton Williams. All right, guys, we're going to continue to take your questions on this mailbag edition of Locked On Eagles. Coming up next, Dallas Goedert. Is he still the future at tight end? We'll get into it right here on Locked On Eagles. This episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature. It keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether you're backing your team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, you never feel like you're missing your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers You get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, we continue to take your questions right here on a mailbag edition of Locked On Eagles, and this is a good one, and it comes from @down3R_20 on X. I hate saying X. I'm just going to keep saying on Twitter. Should the Eagles draft a tight end in the first 3 rounds? Very interesting question. Dallas Goedert had an elite playoff run in 2024. Was, as I've said on the show multiple times, the most consistent part of the Eagles passing game in those 4 playoff games combined. Like, he was the one thing that worked in every single game against Green Bay, LA, Washington, and Kansas City. When Dallas Goedert is healthy, he is a top 3 tight end in football. He is an elite blocker, elite run after the catch tight end. He has elite hands and size, physicality. He is elite when it comes to the vertical explosive plays, the deep ball. He averages more yards per reception than any tight end, really. He's right up there in the top 3, top 5 since 2021 when he took over for Zach Ertz as tight end 1. But the guy does not stay healthy. You can guarantee he will not play a full 17-game season. He's never done it in his career. You're going to have another tight end for 3 to 5 games a year that's got to be ready to step up and be a starter for those games because Goddard's going to get hurt. So should they draft a tight end in the first 3 rounds? Absolutely. For many reasons. Because, again, Goedert won't stay healthy. You're going to need a better backup option than Grant Calcaterra. I like the progress Calcaterra made this year, but I would like to upgrade that position. So, yeah, you definitely got to bring somebody in. It's a really good class. I would love the idea of trading back like you did in 2018 when you took Dallas Goedert in the second round. I like the idea of maybe trading down from 32 and taking someone in the second round. But whether it's your first, second, or third round pick, yeah, you got to bring in a tight end. And especially with how good your roster is, both short-term and long-term, you have the flexibility this year the luxury to take a tight end that can wait in the wings. Plus, not to mention, Dallas Goedert now is the same age that Zach Ertz was when you drafted Goedert in 2018. So you add the injuries, you add the age, the contract coming up. I hope they make it work where both sides can come to this middle ground agreement. Hopefully Goddard's not looking for... I'm interested to see what he wants. Does he want a Travis Kelce-like deal? I think the Eagles have a lot of leverage because he doesn't stay healthy, but Goddard's got leverage too because of how talented he is and how good he's been in the playoffs and was a main reason you won a championship. So hopefully they can come to that middle ground and they can get like a 2 to 3 year extension done. But you should still, like they did with Zach Ertz, who was with Goedert for 3 to 4 seasons, you should still draft that long-term replacement because in the meantime, you're going to need him for backup, like a top-tier backup role. He's going to need to start for about a month a year. And it'd be nice to have a pass-friendly 12 personnel package for once. It'd be nice to have Dallas Goedert and another pass-catching tight end to complement Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown and kind of have another guy along with Jahan Dotson to be that, 4th or 5th target in the offense. Depending on where you see Saquon Barkley fitting in that equation as well, the 4th or 5th guy, it would be nice to have that tight end. So yeah, absolutely. They should absolutely take a tight end with one of their 3 picks. It's a good class. Goedert doesn't stay healthy. He's getting older. We don't know long-term his future when it comes to his contract. Yeah, absolutely. I'm all in on the Eagles drafting a tight end. Is it going to be like TJ Warren from Penn State? Doubt he falls to 32. But there are some good options on day 2 that I really like, and we'll get into that all throughout the offseason. All right, guys, one final question. It's from our girl, Rach Gorski on X. She writes in, what are your top draft priorities heading into the offseason? So, I've been covering the Super Bowl. I'm a little behind when it comes to specific prospects right now, but heading into the offseason, in a broader perspective, what's on the Eagles' wish list? What are their biggest priorities, their grocery list for the draft? And a lot of this can be addressed maybe through free agency, through trades. But right now, before any of that has started, if the draft started today, I'll go about it that way. If the draft started today, what are the main things the Eagles have to get done in 2025? I would say it's replenishing your defensive line depth. because I'm anticipating you lose at least one or both, I think both, Josh Sweat and Milton Williams, plus Brandon Graham's, I think, going to retire. So you're going to lose 3 defensive pieces that were key on your defensive line last year. So I think you should replenish that. I would be okay with taking 2 of your first 3 picks are defensive linemen, an edge rusher and a defensive tackle. It's a really deep class for both positions. Like, this is the year to need a defensive lineman, whereas last year it wasn't as good. I think it was a little thinner. This year, I think it's the right time to invest again in the trenches. You gave me your 2 corners last year. I'm cool with it. Now go back to the meat and potatoes. So I think that's number 1, because you're probably going to lose 3 key pieces of your defensive line rotation. And you still have depth, like Jalix Hunt, Nolan Smith, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Moro Ijoma. You still got like 5 guys that you really like. But you want to be, as Vic Fangio said last offseason, like 7 or 8 deep on the defensive line. So replenish your defensive line depth. Like I said before, I want to add a tight end, a pass-catching tight end, and then maybe draft a guard to compete with Tyler Steen if Mekhi Becton is gone. I like Tyler Steen a lot. I think he really finally deserves a chance to be the full-time starter. But I think they would bring in competition. And even if not, you got to draft more depth if you're going to lose Mekhi Becton. So I would say draft a versatile interior offensive lineman to help maybe even like be a center at some point if Cam Jurgens were to get hurt. Landon Dickerson's on and off the field at times. So yeah, I would say the third thing is draft an interior lineman at some point. So I would say that's my wish list or the priority list for the draft right now. Replenish your defensive line depth, add a tight end behind Dallas Goedert for the future and for the short term, and then maybe add some competition on the interior of the offensive line. Great questions, guys. Really love it. I think it helped kickstart us into the offseason. We'll dive deeper into all of these topics each and every day right here on Locked On Eagles, so make sure you subscribe to the podcast on all platforms and on YouTube as well. Thanks as always for making us your first listen each and every day. Louie DiBiase signing off. Thanks for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.